Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, why a pesticide that's been banned in countries around the world is still allowed in the U.S.
The U.S. is one of the most friendly countries for pesticides generally.
Thousands of Americans are suing Syngenta, the maker of Paraquat, for knowing and covering up its potential long-term health effects. What did they know? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take.
What was the feeling like for you when you were riding a bike, when you were racing?
Really, top of the world, especially when I won.
On top of the world. That's how Gary Munn says he felt back when he could ride a bike.
Yeah, he had lots of trophies.
That's his wife, Tammy.
On diving boards, he used to do these flip things, and we do all these crazy things in the pool.
They've been married for 47 years. They live outside Reno in the U.S. state of Nevada. That's where producer Jeremy Raff met them. Gary's now in his late 60s and retired.
And when he was a much younger person in the 1980s, he worked at the local water company in his town in Southern California.
Jeremy and correspondent Sharif Abdel-Quddus recently interviewed Gary for their film for Al Jazeera's documentary program, Fault Lines. It's called The Pesticide Playbook.
They had me spraying 8 meters and fire hydrants, standpipes.
Part of his job was basically to make sure that water infrastructure in towns, like fire hydrants, water meters, this kind of thing, was clear of weeds. And so they just used the most, kind of widespread popular herbicide at the time, a weed killer called Paraquat.
Paraquat is one of the essential herbicides that we use. Paraquat has a very broad mode of action, and it works well against not only broadleaves, but grasses as well. So that makes it...
So Gary and a partner would just drive around in a truck, and Gary would basically just hold a hose that was attached to a big tank in the back of a pickup truck and just kind of spray the ground as they drove around slowly.
Gary spent about 5 years spraying Paraquat.
And is it coming on your clothes and hands?
Yeah, overspray. And the wind blow up on you.
He said if the wind was blowing, it would blow all over and spray him, get all over.
Gary was only in his 30s when he first started to notice his hand trembling.
His finger would go like that. That was the first signs.
Through my right hand mostly.
Yeah.
He didn't think much of it at first, but it got worse over time. And when they finally got a diagnosis, it turns out that this was the very early onset Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease is a devastating neurological condition. It is progressive, meaning it only gets worse. It's incurable. You can kind of treat the symptoms, but once you have it, it only really goes in one direction.
If it sounds like Jeremy knows a lot about Parkinson's, it's because his father was diagnosed with it about 15 years ago. That's when he started looking into whether there are environmental factors that cause it.
When people get Parkinson's, it's not really a part of the clinical process so much to say, well, where did this come from? With doctors, it's more about treating the symptoms because that's what medicine has available for people with Parkinson's now. So it's just kind of a quiet thing that you wonder, inside your own family. The visible symptoms are tremors that can start from a slight shake of the hands and progress all the way to such violent shaking that eventually it becomes rigidity. People lose their ability to walk, to talk, even to eat, because even the muscles, the small muscles in your eyes, in your throat, in your mouth, these are all affected by the Parkinson's disease. So, Gary, he has a really hard time swallowing. Gary walks with a walker. He moves very slowly. It's very difficult to understand him. Really only his wife, Tammy, can kind of make out what he's saying anymore. The symptoms that are under the surface are equally as devastating, if not more. You get confused. There's a kind of dementia that comes with it that gets worse over time. It transformed their entire life. I mean, Gary and his wife Tammy were always really active. They liked to be on road trips. They liked to drive around in their RV. Gary was a motorcycle racer and a swimmer and a diver.
Tammy mentioned earlier that when Gary was younger, he had a shelf of trophies from winning motorcycle races. Here, she's speaking with Jeremy and Sharif.
During the time when he was angry and stuff, he threw them all away.
You threw away the trophies?
He threw his trophies away, yeah.
This is being angry about getting Parkinson's?
Yeah. Yeah.
Stages of grief.
Yeah.
Now, Gary is one of thousands of farmers from across the U.S. suing the maker of Paraquat, Syngenta. They're alleging that Syngenta not only knew that Paraquat could cause Parkinson's, but also did everything they could to hide what they knew.
This lawsuit is an effort by thousands of farmers across the United States to hold Syngenta accountable for keeping this product on the market despite knowing that it could hurt consumers.
But establishing the link between Parkinson's and Paraquat has been a process. At this point, it's been decades.
So scientists have observed a correlation, an association in real life between farmers who have been exposed to Paraquat based on where they live, that it was used a lot, and the incidence of Parkinson's disease. The other level on which scientists have linked Parkinson's and Paraquat is in the laboratory. So, of course, you can't give people Paraquat and then see if they develop Parkinson's, but you can do that with mice. So we visited a laboratory with one of the lead researchers in this field, a toxicologist, Debbie Corey-Slechta at the University of Rochester. And her lab for a long time has done path-breaking work that demonstrated this link. What Debbie Corey-Slechta found in her lab was that when she exposed rodents to Paraquat, Paraquat killed the neurons in their brains that make dopamine. And that is the process that scientists believe causes Parkinson's.
While it's hard to say definitively what causes any one case, Fault Lines asked Dr. Slechta if Paraquat could have caused Gary's Parkinson's disease.
There's high plausibility. If it's aerosolized, if it's traveling on particles, the smaller the particle, the more likely it is going directly into the brain.
Syngenta denies that Paraquat causes Parkinson's.
I'm Dr. Phil Botham. I'm Principal Science Advisor for Syngenta Product Safety. I used to be the global
This is
head.
from a 2023 promotional video where Dr. Botham denies the link.
That Paraquat is safe for farmers and growers to use. There is no causative link at all between Paraquat exposure and Parkinson's disease.
But Fault Line's investigation found that internally, Syngenta had been researching the possibility.
We reviewed thousands of pages of internal corporate records from within Syngenta and its predecessor companies. And what those records show is that going back decades, scientists and officials from within these companies studied this link, they attempted to quantify it, and then they came up with ways to really vigorously defend this product. One interesting thing that's contained in these records is that a scientist within Syngenta noticed the work of outside groups and wanted to basically see if she could replicate the results of outside scientists like Debbie Corey-Slechta. And The problem for Syngenta is that she was able to replicate them. Syngenta's own in-house scientists found that when they exposed rodents to Paraquat, those rodents developed Parkinson's disease. And what's tough for Syngenta about that is that when companies learn that, they have significant new information about the safety of their product, they're required to report those results to the regulator, which in this case is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency.
That reporting never happened. Fault Lines obtained footage of Philip Botham, the chief scientist you just heard, testifying about that study in 2020 under oath as part of a lawsuit against Syngenta.
Did Syngenta ever publish the results of this study in a peer-reviewed journal?
I'm not aware that it did.
Did Syngenta ever inform the United States Environmental Protection Agency about the loss of dopaminergic neurons observed in the study?
At the time of the study, there was this was not reported to the EPA, that I do know.
But not reporting the research was only part of their strategy.
There is always doubt in the process. That is inherent to the scientific process. And what pesticide companies, like tobacco companies, have been able to do is weaponize that doubt.
There was absolutely no evidence, no increased risk or incidence of Parkinson's disease, no link at all, no increased risk.
It's a highly effective, playbook.
This is Carrie Gillum, an investigative journalist who's been following Paraquat for years.
You see it in pharmaceutical, you see it in oil and gas, just as you saw it in tobacco, and you see it in the chemical industry.
A couple of years ago, Carrie got a ring at her doorbell, and there were just banker's boxes full of thousands of documents that just arrived on her door. And what these documents were years, decades of internal communications.
Carrie had received memos and internal studies that were generated within Syngenta and its predecessor companies. She read through the documents and discovered some of the tactics Syngenta has used over the years to keep its product on the market.
They developed what they called a Paraquat SWAT team that was to immediately react, anytime a new scientific study came out so that they could squash that immediately.
Fault Lines looked into another tactic, sowing doubt in the experts.
An important tactic in the playbook for sort of discrediting science that shows risk to your product is to discredit the scientists. Syngenta, according to the records that we reviewed, really went to great lengths to neutralize anyone who might harm their ability to continue to sell Paraquat.
This included the researcher who did the experiments on mice, Debbie Corey-Slechta.
So when the EPA is deciding what limits to set around pesticides and pesticide use, it seeks out the opinion of independent scientists. Now, when it was reviewing Paraquat, Syngenta caught wind of this, and they sent their lobbyists to work behind the scenes in Washington to keep Debbie Corey-Slechta off of this advisory panel that was meant to tell the EPA whether Paraquat should really still remain on the market. In their emails, they write to each other, make sure that this lobbying effort can't be tracked back to Syngenta. And their effort worked. The EPA didn't end up putting Debbie Corey-Slechta on this panel to advise them.
The EPA is a government agency that's supposed to ensure pesticides are safe for human health. So with all this information out there, why hasn't the agency banned Paraquat? That's after the break. Paraquat came on the market in the 1960s, before the establishment of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. It's a regulator that's supposed to decide which pesticides are safe for humans and the environment.
So the EPA what they do is basically ask their scientists for a level of pesticide harm that is tolerable, and they set a limit to have in the environment. And then those scientific recommendations kind of go into the EPA. And at that point, other considerations enter the calculus. And on the other side, an EPA recommendation comes out. And the outcome of that for many years has been to reapprove Paraquat over and over again. It's very rare for the EPA to cancel a pesticide, and it's become more rare over the decades.
And Fault Lines was able to speak to a former employee who saw those changes firsthand.
Karen McCormick worked in the EPA's Office of Pesticide Programs for almost 40 years, and she spoke to us in her first on-camera interview.
Do you think the EPA is overall fulfilling its mission?
No, I do not think it's fulfilling its mission. Just about every new pesticide application that is submitted to the agency is approved, no matter how high the risk.
And so that allows for something like Paraquat to just stay on the market.
Yes, and a lot of other toxic pesticides.
Why is it so hard to ban a pesticide at the EPA?
Pesticide companies and their congressmen have tremendous influence on EPA's decisions.
What she described from the inside of the EPA's pesticide office is, in her words, a captured agency, meaning the agency really does the bidding of industry, not the other way around. And that, that is a profound allegation, because the EPA is really supposed to have the public interests in mind and be safeguarding the public health and not foregrounding the concerns of the agricultural industry. Paraquat's been banned in more than 50 countries around the world. It's been banned in the European Union, it's banned in China, it's banned in Brazil. So it's banned in some of the most important agricultural economies in the world, except for the United States, where the use of Paraquat is actually increasing. A big difference is that in Europe, they apply what's known as the precautionary principle, which is to say, European regulators want to know, is this product safe? That's how it works in Europe. In the United States, our regulators, so the Environmental Protection Agency, they really do take economic considerations and maybe even political considerations into account when deciding which pesticides remain on the market.
In November, Fault Lines went to a meeting where the EPA's top pesticide officials spoke to industry representatives and environmental advocates. The director of the EPA's pesticide office, Ed Messina, said the scientific evidence hadn't shown a strong enough link to Parkinson's to justify banning it. He declined an on-camera interview, but he said off-camera that the EPA considers both a pesticide's risks and its benefits. Back in Reno, Nevada, the risks have become Gary's reality.
So we spent some time watching home videos with Gary and Tammy, and, you can see a happy couple, big hair, backyard pool. Gary's putting mom up on his shoulders and jumping off the diving board. Just a person full of life.
So what's it like for you to watch this now?
Yeah, when you see yourself doing that.
I look so young.
I feel like I don't remember that, especially when I hear your voice. It's like I don't remember that voice.
Today, his Parkinson's is so advanced that he has recently had one of the more invasive treatments that is available to Parkinson's patients, and that's called deep brain stimulation. With deep brain stimulation, doctors implant electrodes in the brain. And the idea is that these electrodes, by stimulating the brain, it can relieve some of the motor symptoms. And Gary actually controls the deep brain stimulation from an app on his phone. Gary wanted to show us how bad his Parkinson's really is. So he took out his phone, opened up an app, and pressed a big red stop button on the screen, and the electrodes implanted in his brain stopped firing, and you could immediately see the shaking go from tremors to something more like violent shaking.
How does it feel when you're turning it on and off like that?
My diaphragm gets tight, hard to breathe. My head was shaking, and my change settings, I feel a tingling in my head.
He's saying it's tight, hard to breathe, and that when he changes the settings, he feels a tingling in his head.
And even then, he was saying, now remember, I'm still even on my medication. So if I stop the medication for a couple of days and turned off the deep brain stimulation, it gets even more profound.
Take meds off, it's a lot worse. I can't walk, I can hardly move.
You know, unfortunately, it's too late for Gary. But he told us that this is not about him. These lawsuits take so long that he may be long gone by the time it sees its conclusion. He said it's about other people. And he said it's about preventing others from going through what he's going through right now.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Tamara Khandaker, with Catherine Nouhan and me, Malika Bilal. It was edited by Alexandra Locke. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.